Colossians 3:15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace." Peace is one of the familial blessings. You can have peace in your heart and be at peace with others because you have the peace of Christ. "Peace I leave with you," Jesus said, "my peace I give you." He gave us His peace, the peace that transcends all understanding. What is the peace of Jesus? Well, it's a peace that is rooted in His divine sovereignty, His right to rule and reign. Jesus rules over all, creation, humanity, and history. No circumstance, no diagnosis, no prognosis, no seemingly inevitable outcome, no matter how difficult, painful, unwelcome, or grave, leaves Him feeling anxious, perplexed, or overwhelmed. He is always at perfect peace because He rules over all. He rules and reigns. So when we step into His reign, we step into His peace. As the prophet Isaiah wrote, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast or fixed on you because they trust in you." Trust in Him and you get His peace. In fact, you already have it. You have His peace. He gave it to you. That's not the question. The question is, does it rule in your heart? Look again at Colossians 3:15. Paul writes, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." Paul uses a word here that only appears once in the New Testament. He says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." The word we translate rule is an expressive term sometimes used to refer to an umpire or a referee in a sporting event. When I read that, I was immediately reminded of my short but celebrated career as an umpire. It was 1973 and it lasted for one game. I was 12 years old, let me underline that. What happened next is not my fault. An umpire didn't show up one Saturday afternoon, so I was drafted from the stands to umpire one of my little brother's baseball games. I still can't believe it. I didn't want to do it, but none of the parents did either. And I'm not sure what they were thinking. On what planet was I qualified to call balls and strikes, let alone enforce the rules in a game where my little brother was the star of one of the teams? It was a recipe for disaster from the start. But it seemed good to everyone, including my father. He was probably thinking it would be a learning experience for me. Well, he was right. I learned a lot. My little brother came to the plate in the first inning. With the count 2-0, I remembered that they told me to have a generous strike zone. These are young kids, they said, and most of them can't throw it in the ocean standing on the beach. So if the pitch is remotely close, give them the benefit of the doubt and call it a strike. Okay, I thought. The next pitch was a foot outside, so I called it a strike. Eric quickly looked back at me with confusion on his face, shook his head, and turned back around. To his credit, he didn't say anything. The next pitch was practically over his head, but when the catcher stopped it, I called it a strike. I was going to show them that I was completely impartial, and nothing, not even my relationship with my little brother, was going to color my unshakable objectivity. Eric struck out looking 3 times that day on pitches that weren't even in the same zip code. The ride home was violent, to say the least. The peace of Christ was not ruling in his heart. I had robbed him of his peace. When Paul says, "Let the peace of Christ act as an umpire, a referee, or an arbitrator in your heart," he knows that the peace of Jesus is a way better umpire than I will ever be. Here, it means that in all inner conflicts, as well as in all disputes and differences amongst Christians, Christ's peace must give the final decision. We are to do nothing that would violate that peace. Where there's a conflict of motives or desires, when you're torn between one activity or another, one relationship or another, one pursuit or another, the peace of Christ must step in and decide which is to prevail. Which of these two motives, which of these two desires, which of these myriad of choices, relationships, will keep me in perfect peace, and which will rob me of my peace? What rules your heart? What determines what you will ultimately do or not do, say or not say? How do you decide what to do when there's a conflict of motives or desires? What steps in and decides what prevails? We are ruled by many things: shoulds and oughts, the expectations of others, the good opinion of others, wants and desires. These things act like an umpire in our hearts, dictating our choices, behaviors, reactions, and interactions, often robbing us of our peace. As C.S. Lewis wrote, when we make a choice, we become different than we were before that choice. With every one of our choices, we either become a little more a creature of heaven, at peace with God, at peace with other people, at peace with ourselves, or a little more a creature of hell, at war with God, at war with other people, and at war with ourselves. Two of the most vocal umpires are things and feelings. Are you living a life shaped by things and feelings instead of by God? Many of our lives are ruled by things and feelings, the desire for things, the acquisition of things, the caretaking of things. Things as the measure of our worth. Things often rule our hearts, dictate our choices, dominate our thoughts, influence our behaviors, and stoke our desires. And then some are ruled by their feelings. Feelings are the umpires of their hearts, calling the shots, affecting their moods. So they do what feels good in the moment. They sometimes respond emotionally, impulsively, or flippantly. People whose lives are shaped by feelings are often impetuous, rash, hot-headed, and foolhardy, or alternately, cynical, suspicious, world-weary, and depressed. The peace of Christ doesn't rule in a heart that is shaped by things, in a heart shaped by feelings. Is your heart shaped by things? Is your identity wrapped up in your success, your net worth, your financial portfolio, in the things you own, the things that money can buy, the things you think you absolutely have to be happy? If so, you will never have enough. You will never be satisfied. You will never find peace. Is your heart shaped by feelings, up one day and down the next, to the point where you're unable to enjoy anything for fear of what might happen or what could happen or what has happened? My friends, if your feelings get a grip on the end of your string, you will always be the yo-yo. Are you, as Lewis wrote, at peace with God, at peace with others, at peace with yourself? Or are you at war with God, at war with others, and at war with yourself? Paul says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. You have the peace of Christ. He gave it to you. The question is, will you let it rule you? Will you allow His peace to dictate the movements of your heart?